All right, so I brought in the Franz Marc painting and I did a 3 upstacked formation. So I have this cute little guy here, and then I've got these crazy colors here. And I can go back to mine and arrange it. And by the way, you can use your little scroll wheel on your mouse and move around all of these without even selecting them individually. Okay, now this frees me up to do some nice free painting in the face because I'm doing a different angle, and the ears. And it frees me up to be a little bit more experimental with my color selection, right? Like I love this almost ivory white kind of charged color that Franz Marc uses. And I can try that, especially with these purples. This is a fox, and foxes aren't those colors. No reason my little pygmy deer needs to be mostly brown, right? I can even use some of those really intense accent colors. As I further refine the face here. And then the shadow tones, more in the crimson and the purples. Get more of a core shadow on him. So just like I did with a Jack Kirby spread for my digital coloring, for whatever reason, I just really like being able to steal colors from artists I like. I like to be inspired by their palettes.
Wait, so do we put all of the colors on the same layer or make different layers for different parts?
So in the painting layers, some digital painters like to use just tons and tons of layers. Like they might do a different layer for the head, different layers for the legs. I keep it pretty straightforward. I do an underpainting layer that's flat and 100% opaque. And then each time I change the opacity of my brush, I make a new layer. So this is my first layer, which goes on top of my sketch. Oh, my sketch isn't showing up. There it is. So there's my sketch. There's my flat color layer that went on top of my sketch. The goal here is to kill whitey. That's how I remember it. Get rid of all the whites behind. So that even the whites that you paint have to be selected and painted. And then on top of that, I'm at 70% and I do my refined painting. Now if I take away all the other layers, the refined painting is mostly going to cover everything, but it's covering it at a lower opacity. And it just won't have the full, like if I turn the white background on, you'll see how there's a lot of holes in this. And that's where my underpainting helps kill whitey. So that's how I do it. And it works pretty fast. But I choose not to do lots and lots of different layers until I change the opacity of my brush. That doesn't mean I don't change the size of my brush or even the type of brush layer to layer. Or all on the same layer. But when I change the opacity, I'll move to a different layer. I also notice that the mouth is higher than I had it before. So I'm using that advantage of being able to overpaint. And that the nose is maybe a little bit bigger than I had it before. Now, what I'm trying to do here is not make any area just beautiful and perfect. What I'm trying to do is bring everything up to the same level of finish. So when I started a couple demos ago, when I started today, coming back from the weekend and working on this, the head was the most finished thing. So I had to bring up the rest of the body to that level. But then as I was working on the rest of the body, that got more finished looking. And now I need to bring the head back up to that level. And as long as you're looking at the whole thing, while you're working, you're not ignoring any areas, you're going to bring it up to a nice finish. Even if it's not all as finished as you would like by the end, It will all feel thought about and consistent. And that respects your audience, and they will reward you for it with polite praise. Whether they like pygmy deer or not. But if I did this amazing painting of the eye and the nose, but the rest of it looked really, really rushed and shoddy, then they would be lying when they said that they liked it in general. Because we see the details as the artist, but our audience, they just see the overall impression that we give them. So you want to try to bring a finish to everything. And then if they really like the overall impression, then they'll look at the details. And then they'll see all the different color choices. And then they might like it enough to actually, pay $5 for a print. That's getting harder and harder. Okay, so I'm going to frame in the eyes a little bit, give them a little bit of their own structure. I don't really like black, so instead of the black for the eyes and the nose, I'm going to use some of that Franz Marc dark blue. Paint that over at not 100%, at 70%. And now I'm going to play with the ears, have some fun with those textures and colors, but not allowing myself to move to a really small brush to get all those tiny hairs. Instead, just try to do it with my pressure-sensitive brush as it is. Maybe I can throw some of these yellows in here. So I like the small, cheap, portable tablets, even though they don't have the sensitivity of the more expensive, larger ones. Mostly I like them because I don't have to worry about them getting damaged. I can carry them with me and use them on different computers while I travel.
You do have to worry about when you drop the pen on the floor and you can't find it.
Yeah, you can lose the pen.
I do it all the time. And then it turns out that I'm sitting on it.
Yeah. Yeah, my preference is always for wired tablets, not the wireless ones. But most of the ones I see that they make now give you the option.
Yeah, you can buy. Mine has battery in it.
Yeah. But the reason I don't like wireless stuff in general is just because how often you have to change the batteries, even if it seems like especially if they're rechargeable. You have to be recharging them all the time. But everyone finds the tools that work for them.
I couldn't believe how expensive some of those tablets are.
Yep. Yeah, they get exponentially more expensive with their size.
Wow, imagine if you're working in a professional studio, if it's necessary.
Yeah, and in a professional studio, if you're doing a lot of digital painting, like if you're a concept painter or a character designer, you'll have Cintiqs to use, which are computer screens that are tablets. Well, those are thousands and thousands of dollars, but they are a lot of fun. And it's a smart way to do it. It's actually a smarter way than buying the new kind of PC Surface workstations. I think the laptops are fine because those are made to be only good for about 5 years anyway. But if you get the professional Surface workstations, which are made to be kind of pressure sensitive screens, they're not as pressure sensitive and as refined as Cintiq, which has been doing it for a lot longer with the Wacom brand. But also, you're limited to all those computer hardware limits. Whereas with the Cintiq, you can use that with any computer CPU. And as those CPUs get stronger and the programs get better, they also take up more space, but you can still use that interface. So I generally think that if you're really into this, those Cintiq tablets are a good investment. because they can be transferred PC to Mac, they can be transferred computer to computer. As long as you don't like spill a lot of water on them or something, it should last you. I don't have any stock in that company. Now there's a lot to be said for what you can do in digital art with free tools, and it is definitely a very democratic art form. You have artists working from, remote locations. A lot of artists from East Asia that find international careers almost in secret doing illustration jobs digitally.
When my daughter had her little business that they did apps and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
her guys lived in Argentina.
Yeah. So it can be very remote and very.
And they were very good.
Yeah. And as the technology and the tools get cheaper and cheaper, that's just going to keep expanding, and that increases the types and diversity of voices that influence everybody. It's what I just kind of broadly refer to as the design world online. And so when you make discoveries, you kind of share them, whether they're in DeviantArt tutorials or Patreon pages or YouTube channels, whatever it is.
Hack into other computers. One day, one of my kids hacked into my husband's computer at work.
Uh-huh.
He was typing and she was erasing and he couldn't figure out what was going on because they had interfaced with home. And one of the kids was at home.
Yep.
And he got a little pissed off.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah. They thought it was funny.
Yep. Lovely what you can do with technology.
I thought it was funny, but I wasn't working.
So where I was going with that is that there are some tools, though, that still make a big difference. And tablets, to me, for two-dimensional design, illustration, digital art, especially digital painting and digital coloring, they make a big difference. But luckily, like I said, the ones I use are always $100 or less. They're the ones that are being used, all over the world. So Cintiqs are great, but you definitely don't need to be able to afford one in order to make good work. All right, so now I've pretty much finished the refined paint layer, at least my first one, at 70% opacity with these open brushes. Put a little bit more color in. I'm sure there are some areas I'll look at later and want to work with it a little differently. But this is a way I like to check it. I like that I'm getting a little bolder in my color choices. I like to turn off the underpaint layer and then turn off the gray and see if all those paint strokes and colors still have some personality. And they do. And now what I like to do is mess with it. So I'm going to save it. And before I go too much further, I'm going to free paint some antlers on and then do some refined. I'll do another paint layer where I play with opacity and do some glazing just to show you what that's like. But before I do that, I'm going to take my refined paint layer. I'm going to duplicate it, Command-J. And you see just by doing that, because my brush was open and lower opacity, it changes what it looks like. All that is a duplicate, right? But it already makes it a little bit more opaque. And on this duplicate now, I'll turn my gray background back on. And I'll turn my underpainting back on. On this duplicate, I'm going to now play with some of my direct adjustments. So first of all, I might go to auto tone. And that will balance out the histogram. And that's a pretty dramatic change, right? Because I've been working in this very narrow range of warms. So if I say auto tone, it will make it more full spectrum. Then I might play with image adjustment, color balance, my favorite, right? Say, what if I take the highlights and I push them more warm? towards the yellow, towards the red. Be a little towards